Welcome back. So just so you guys know, I did speak with Mrs. Infanzon. We talked about some things with 9 sessions to go, like the best way to get the best bang for the buck. You want to talk about it? So I'm gonna, we looked at the papers that you guys normally get, and she said if I focus in on these 9 things over the next 9 weeks, or the next 9 sessions, this will definitely help you guys out, okay? So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, and hopefully this will help you. So today what I want to do is I really kind of want to talk to you about World War I, the strategies that were there, some of the different fronts, and some of the results before we then jump into what we're going to call the interwar years, with the end of the First World War and then up leading into World War II, okay? Is everybody good with that? Now, it's always wise if you want to take some notes. I do always send you guys the PowerPoint and the PDF. It doesn't hurt you if you ever have it, printed off, because that'll definitely help you. So let's take a look here. So just to give you a real quick rundown, the countries in green are going to be what we call the Allies. The countries in this brown color will be what we call the Central Powers, with the exception of Italy. Italy will start and eventually move its way over to the Allied side of things. They kind of wait to see who's going to win, and then they kind of jump that way. That's kind of what Italy does a lot of times. So just again, to give you guys an idea here were the Central Powers, so Germany, Austria. Remember, Austria is Austria-Hungary. When I say it, I just say Austria. Austria, the Ottoman Empire, and then the Allies will be France, Russia. Russia's going to leave in 1917. We're going to talk about that because they're going to go into a revolution. Britain, when I'm talking about Britain, I'm not only talking about England, I'm talking about England, Scotland, I'm talking about the Commonwealths of Canada, New Zealand, Australia, so their entire empire. Italy will join in 1915, and as Russia is leaving, the United States will be joining, and that's going to make a huge difference. So these are the two sides, the two combatants, if you want to talk about it, okay? And like I said, so to give you guys an idea why this is important is when we're looking at the actual war itself, this matters. If you take a look, what do you notice between the Central and the Allied powers? What do you notice for differences?
Well, Allied powers have like a lot more troops, a lot more supplies, a lot more.
Yes, they have more divisions, more troops. The biggest difference, or the biggest advantage that the Central Powers will have is that they're geographically next to each other. If you think about it, Germany and Austria are right there, whereas France and Russia and Britain, they're all separated. That's really the only main or real advantage that the Central Powers have. And what happens is, this is going to be a war of attrition. Do you know what the word attrition means? It's a war of survival. Who can outlast whom? Okay? It's both sides are it's like 2 heavyweight boxers just slugging each other, and it's going to be who can survive the most punches. That's what we mean by a war of attrition, because it's going to be who can survive the longest. And with this many troops and divisions, that's going to definitely be a help when you see the millions of men that are killed. Something that the Germans have over all of the other allies here, and it is important, is that they had an advanced system of command and control. The German army is well built, it is well organized, and they do know how to fight. I mean, that's one thing, the Prussians, the Germans, they've always been a fierce kind of people, and so they know how to fight, and they can move their troops all over the place. And what's good is, remember, they're centrally located, so they can move their troops wherever they want. For the Allies, some of the things to look at is, basically, like if you look at Russia, Russia does not have the supplies that they need. When they go into the first Battle of Tannenberg, like 1 out of 3 Russians didn't even have a gun. They didn't even have a rifle to shoot with. It was kind of like wait for somebody to die, pick it up, and then fight. So they have that disadvantage. Also, Russia, they're not very well organized. It's a large army, it's a large nation population-wise, but they are not very good when it comes to communications and so forth. When the U.S. comes in, the U.S. had a very, very, very small army. Very small army. Because why would you have such a large army living here in the Western Hemisphere? There's really no enemy to worry about. Nothing really to worry about with Mexico, nothing to really worry about with Canada. So there was no need to have a huge conscripted army. But they will build it. And last but not least, the British, what you have to understand with them is they have the best navy in the world, and they're going to be able to do things with their navy. But their land troops, they're not built for land troops. Simply because, again, they're more of a naval empire, and also their navy now has to defend the entire empire. Because as this war is going on, it's not only taking place in Europe, but it's going to be taking place in other parts of the world as well. Questions on that? Do we understand some of these? Yeah, okay. So to give you an idea of some of the main events of the war here, as you can see in 1914, the Archduke is assassinated. That's the trigger that gets the war started. The war begins about a month later. We have the first Battle of the Marne. And these are some of the big key battles. The Marne, Verdun, and the Somme. These two are rivers. This is a big kind of like castle, fortress encasement. In 1917, the United States will enter the war. Russia will drop out. In 1918, the Germans are going to try one last punch through the lines on the Western Front, which we're going to talk about. It's called the Spring Offensive, and it's going to fail, and that's just going to basically end Germany's ability to fight any further. And then in 1919, we're going to have the Treaty of Versailles, okay? So let's take a look here. So what were the two fronts, or the major fronts that we're going to look at? The first front we're going to look at is right here. It's called the Western Front. As you can see here, see this purple line? That is going to be the main front. And what happened here is this. You guys remember the Schlieffen Plan? What was the Schlieffen Plan, real quick?
It was planned instead of going from Germany straight to France, Germany would go through Belgium and then into France.
Right, they were supposed to basically more or less touch the English Channel, come around Paris, surround it, and bring it back. That did not happen. They got stopped here at the Marne River, just outside of Paris. And when that happens, when the Schlieffen Plan fails, now all of a sudden it's like, well, I've got to outflank my enemy. Because if I'm fighting you face to face, if I want to get around you, I've got to outflank you. So now both sides start moving your way up to the English Channel and moving their way down to the Alps. And once they get there, can they go any further?
No.
No, because those are natural borders. There's no way you can outflank anybody at that point. And when that happens now we have a stalemate. This is now going to become a war of attrition. What's attrition again?
Survival.
It's basically survival. Who can out-survive the other one, outlast the other one? And what happens here is, at the beginning, there's going to be limited supplies. All of the new weapons that they're going to build is just going to wreak havoc on people. They're going to be, killing so many more people than has ever happened in history in battles. It's unprecedented. The defenses are so strong that nobody could break through to the other side. So what you have here is, again, you have like two major monsters just going at it, and there's nowhere for them to go. All they can do is just go head to head, okay? So that's what the Western Front's going to look like here. And again, it's nothing but a stalemate. Like this, sorry. So what are some of the weapons that they had? And this is important because one of the questions on your exam could be about technology. Could be how technology impacted the war. So, machine guns. What do we know about machine guns compared to rifles?
Shoot a lot faster.
Yes, they shoot a lot faster. Here's one of the things that is not showing up there on the screen. They are fighting the wars from the previous century when it comes to strategy and when it comes to techniques. What happens is they're not ready for the modern warfare. They're not ready to fight a war where there are machine guns where people could just, mow you down. That's why they're telling people, come up out of the trench, run across no man's land into this wide open space to attack the other side. Well, 20, 30, 40 years ago, that would have worked pretty well. Now, it does not, because again, instead of firing 25 rounds, one person can fire 600 rounds in a minute. Multiply that by 10, 20, 30, 100, 1,000. This is why, I believe at the Battle of the Somme on the first day, the British lost like 18,000 men dead on the first day. It was just, it was outrageous, okay? Within the first few hours. The artillery that they're going to do, they're going to be bombing. And again, this is something that they never had before. Yes, they could send cannon. Yes, they could, you know, hit artillery targets. But the bottom line is they didn't have the strength of the artillery that they now have. The weapons are much better. They're much more powerful. And they're more accurate. And that's important that they're accurate. Hand grenades, so they can throw those. They're going to start bringing out poison gas. And as they bring out this poison gas, what happens is they will build gas masks. Did you guys know that during this, that sometimes when they would release gas, so let's say I'm the British and you guys are the Germans, and so I sent, you know, mustard gas at you guys. What would happen sometimes, do you know?
Well, the wind could either blow it back at them, and then sometimes the mustard gas was heavier than air, so it would lay in the trenches for a couple of days, so even when it was gone, it still could.
Absolutely. So it would blow back in their faces. Sometimes it would sit there in the trenches. And so basically, sometimes you were trying to hurt the other side, but you actually hurt yourself. In this here, tanks will be a brand new weapon that's developed by the British, okay? They're nice, but they don't work very well. It's a new technology. They don't work as well as that they will in World War II. They get stuck in trenches. They get stuck in some of the potholes. They break down a lot. Sometimes the toxin, the fumes that come in will just kill people. And so basically, it's not going to be until the end of the war that tanks become a little bit more important. But by that point, the war is pretty much over. So far, so good. Questions? Questions? Okay. Now, some of the key engagements on the Western Front is going to first of all start in Belgium. Right now, what's going on in the Ukraine? What's happening right now in the Ukraine?
Russia's trying to take back their old land, or trying to take over the colony.
So Russia invaded Ukraine. What did Russia expect?
To just blow through them.
Yeah, they expected to just go right on through. Teaching?
I'm so sorry.
Okay.
What's their meeting today?
No, it's Thursday.
Oh,
Yeah,
I thought
I'm
it was
sorry, yeah.
Tuesday. Okay, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. So if you think about it, did the Russians expect the Ukrainians to put up such a fight?
No.
So the Russians expected to already have it over with, right? It's not even close. Same thing with the Germans. They thought they were going to go screaming right on through Belgium, right on in. And this is part of the reason why the Schlieffen Plan also breaks down, is they were not expecting to be bogged down there. This is important because this could be another part of your question when it comes to strategies. The other big one right at the beginning in 1914 is the Battle of the Frontiers. This is where where France decided that they were going to attack Alsace-Lorraine. They were going to do their own attack. And they did at one point push in to Alsace-Lorraine, which is now part of Germany. But they are eventually repulsed, and what happens from there, that now becomes a stalemate as well. So both plans that were put into action to win fail, hence we have a serious stalemate. All right, and so if you want to take a look here, so again, here's France, here's Alsace and Lorraine, so that's where they were trying to push in, but it didn't work there, okay? So, what can I tell you about the Battle of the Marne? The Battle of the Marne, you ever hear of the Miracle of the Marne? The Battle of the Marne is also known as the Miracle at the Marne. Why? It was a miracle because the French were able to stop the Germans. This is that when they were doing the Schlieffen Plan as they were coming in. Well, when they got here towards the Marne River, when they got there, what happened is the French were able to reassess and to reorganize their army. The Germans had stiffer resistance coming through than they expected. Their men are tired. Their supply chain isn't quite where it needs to be. They've got a lot of casualties, and now they got to start defending what they took. And by the way, what's a casualty? Do you know? If I say to you, there was 100,000 casualties, what does that mean?
100,000 people died.
No. No. It's a combination. A casualty is when somebody can no longer fight. So let's say there's 20 people here, and 18 of us are casualties. that could mean 10 of us were killed and eight of us were wounded so much that we cannot fight anymore. So there is a difference between a casualty and death, just so you know. Because a lot of times people think, if you say 700,000 casualties, they think everybody died, but that's not the case. So what happens here is, you know, the Germans are kind of now also slowing down for their own reasons. When this happens, the French are going to take advantage of this, and this is where they're now going to try to outflank each other and move the Western Front north and south. Okay? I know I've gone over this a few times, but it's important because if they have this question on the exam, they will be talking about some of the strategies and why it did not. And it's also known as the race to the sea. Did you know that? So what's going to happen here is once it's stopped, it's now going to be a race to the sea to see, no pun intended, who can get around the other one first. And once they get there, there's no getting around because now you're trying to invade in water, and that's just not going to go well. Now, another part is something called the Battle of Verdun. Verdun is one of these fortresses that's very important. This will take place in February to December of 1916. So as you can see, this is about a 10 to 11 month battle. It is a massive battle. And during this, basically what the German general, Falkenhayn, this is him right here. You can always tell Germans because they usually have an iron cross on them. Okay, what he wanted to do was to basically bleed the French white, meaning he not only wanted to take the fortress, but he wanted to bleed them so much that they would not be able to continue to fight. That's what he's trying to do. It's not going to work because the French are absolutely ready. And this is what we call a total war mentality, where they're just going to go all at it to win this battle. In the meantime, there's all of this massive shelling that goes on, but ultimately, the French will not give it up because Verdun is kind of one of those like symbols. Do we have a symbol like that in America? Something that we didn't, something that somebody fought back in the 1840s in Texas? Remember the
Alamo.
Remember the Alamo, okay? In a sense, it's similar. You know, Verdun, this fortress, this castle is one of those national historic places where they can't lose here. This is now about pride. This is about everything. And so what happens is after this battle, Germany will not take Verdun and we will continue to be in a stalemate. What's important about this is the casualty rate. About 700,000 men will be wounded. 300,000 of those 700,000 are actually killed. That's a lot of men. That's a lot of men in an 11-month battle. To give you an idea, the United States Civil War took 4 years, and in those 4 years, total death was 650,000 men over 4 years. And most of those men died because of disease, not because of weapon or bullets or bombardments. This is war on a level they've never seen before. And this is Pétain, General Pétain, who will become kind of important in the French in the 20s and 30s. Am I going too fast? Not fast enough? Another key engagement is the Battle of the Somme. And here's an interesting picture. I kind of put it up here to give you an idea. This is actually somebody took it and they colorized it. So this is a British Tommy soldier. This is a German soldier, and it looks like this guy here and here. They look French just by the uniforms that they're wearing. But this is going to be another key battle where they're going to try to break through to get through the defenses, get around the enemy, and stop the war. The problem is that the battle plan is absolutely going to fail. And literally, as the soldiers are running towards the enemy lines, they're literally going to be just mowed down. I mean, mowed down by machine guns. The amount of death here is ridiculous. You look at this, July through November, so that's July, August, September, October, November, that's 5 months. Over 1 million casualties in 5 months. Okay? These right here, Verdun and the Somme, what they're really showing the world is that war has become very difficult, nasty, and almost in a sense unwinnable. And the people had, when they first left for war, they were very excited for it. They couldn't wait to get there. They couldn't wait to be part of this fight. They're thinking it's going to be 5, 6 weeks, maybe a couple of months, and it's going to be over. We're now into 1916, almost the end of 1916, 2 years. And we're just getting millions and millions of men that are just coming back as either casualties or are dead. So this is the grim reality. And if you take a look at that picture, you know, that kind of shows you what was going on there. Questions on these? Another front to look at is going to be the Eastern Front. The Eastern Front is basically going to be the Russians against the Germans and the Austrians. This one is not as big a stalemate. Let me go back 1 second here. Let me just say this. One other thing I want you to know about the Western Front is for 4 years they will go back and forth. The front line will probably move over those 4 years no more than about 1 to 2 miles either way. So for 4 years, millions of men died for about a mile or 2 of land, you know, going east and west. Whereas here, what happens is the Russians, they're going to do most of the fighting on this front, obviously because they're on that front. But the thing is they are not prepared for war. They are beyond, it's beyond a disaster for the Russians, beyond a disaster for them. Tannenberg, what I tell you about their weapons there? How many weapons did they?
1 to 3.
1 out of 3 men had, 1 out of 3 men didn't have a weapon. I mean, think about it, okay? What happens here is this is so disastrous that eventually the people in Russia are losing faith in the war. And along is going to come a man. Do you know who he is?
Lenin.
That is Vladimir Lenin. What's going to happen is there's going to be 2 revolutions in 1917 that take place in Russia. Now, why do I have February, March, October, November? Because the Russians use the old calendar. So it's February for them, it's really March on our modern calendar. So in February or March, the people of Russia revolted and they overthrow the Tsar. They don't kill him yet, they just remove him from power and they bring in a provisional government. And they say to that government, get us out of the war. But the government does not. They continue to fight. It continues to be so unpopular that in October, Russian calendar, November, the calendar we have now, the Bolsheviks, that's a communist party led by Vladimir Lenin, comes in and they overthrow that provisional government and they create a brand new country called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the Soviet Union. And eventually, by March of 1918, they're going to sign a treaty with the Germans called the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Say that, Brest-Litovsk. There you go, good. And what's going to happen is it's going to remove Russia from the war. It removes Russia from the war. When this, and also in this revolution, what happens to the Tsar and his family?
They get killed.
They are murdered, yes. When Russia's out of the war, why is that good for the Germans?
One less side to focus on, they can direct them.
One last front. If you think about the Germans, they're in the middle. So as they're being attacked on their right and their left, what do they have to fight both sides. Now that the Russians are out, they can turn their whole view towards the Western Front and fight the British and the French and the now emerging United States Army that's coming there. But what they expect is they're hoping, and that's why it's called the Spring Offensive, they're hoping to push through before the Americans actually get there, and it's going to fail. Another front that was there, this is going to be known as the Ottoman Front. And again, this will be the Ottoman Empire against the Russians and the British Empire for the most part. And what happened here is, this is Russia here, here is Crimea. Have you heard of Crimea?
Yep.
It's very important land that was taken over not too long ago by the Russians. Right here, this comes out into the Mediterranean Sea. When you come through here, these are called the Dardanelles Straits, or the Dardanelles. This right here is a narrow piece of water that lets you get in and get to warm water ports. Because don't forget, Russia's surrounded by ocean that's very cold, the Arctic, and then the Baltic are very cold waters that sometimes freeze up. So this is their only way to really supply and get supplies out. So they have a battle here called Gallipoli. Where am I? Gallipoli. And the goal for the British is to open up the Dardanelles Straits. It basically fails, and with this, the Russians are going to be very difficult to continue to supply because there's no way to get the stuff there. Okay? Strategies. Strategies are failing, aren't they? Another front that we never talk about is the home front. So, this is really, 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 really huge. Because what starts to happen out of World War I is what you're really still seeing creeping into modern day countries around the world. During this war, because there's so much going on and because you have to go into what's called a total war, the governments have to grow in power. They have to start controlling and running more things. Because if they don't, they're not going to be able to get all of the material that they need, whether it's weapons, whether it's food, whether it's clothing, whatever it might be, they're not going to be able to. So what happens is, these governments will grow in power, and do you think they're going to give up their control?
No.
Oh, heck no, they never do that. So, it's called war socialism in England, or in the British Empire, and this is where the government's going to start to control the economy. They're going to start setting prices, setting, you can only sell this for this much. They're going to start saying you can only buy so much sugar, you can only buy so much gasoline, you can only do this. They're going to ration all of the major supplies that they need to. You're also going to need books to get some of these in different places where, maybe each week you're only allowed to buy, 3 gallons of gas. You have a job that's more important, maybe you get to buy 10 gallons of gas. But you have to have the coupon book to do this. They're going to conscript men. They're going to start, forcing men into the military. They're going to make strikes illegal. Why are they going to make strikes illegal?
So there's no protest.
Not only not no protest,
Well, you
No
have to have
uprising.
your.
no uprising. Why else?
Manufacturing has to be in place. So
Why
you-
does manufacturing have to be in place?
So you can actually build weapons to supply the war effort.
Absolutely. If I'm trying to beat my enemy and I need another 1,000 tanks, but everybody who makes tanks goes on strike, do I have any tanks?
No.
No. You need these kinds of supplies, okay? Military leaders are going to get more and more in control. Propaganda is going to increase. I mean, look at how they make the Kaiser here and his U-boats. And they want you to, that basically one of these wonderful sayings, defeat the Kaiser and his U-boats. Victory depends on which fails first, the food or frightfulness. Eat less wheat. It's a war of attrition. War of attrition. Censorship. You want to speak out against the government? Not going to be allowed. Why? Because they can't have a second message out there. They need everybody behind this. Women, this could be very important because you might see this on your exams as well. Women are going to start coming into the workforce like never before. There will be many of them that will start off in factories, but when we get to World War II, because it's such an even bigger war, that there will be even more women that are involved in the actual factories, and even in some countries they'll have their own special services. But what happens is the women come in and they start to get a taste for work, they start to get a taste for an income, they start to get a taste for more freedom and more social mobility. And what happens is, if you look here, 80% of all the armaments made in Britain were actually made by women. This is also going to impact the suffragette movement. What's a suffragette?
Women's rights.
Not only women's rights, but the women's right to vote. Yes, the women's right to vote. And so this is going to play a very important role. Women are going to, again, start getting the taste of life beyond the home. And with this, though most of them, overwhelmingly, majority will go back to their homes, it's going to start leading to more and more social changes. How was the war fought? Well, we have the war at sea. Basically, why is the ocean going to be, controlling the ocean going to be very important?
Supply lines.
What's that?
Supply lines.
Supply lines, absolutely supply lines. Who's going to be supplying Europe.
Us,
Who's us?
US.
The United States, correct. The United States is going to be sending many, many supplies. Now, we did say as a country that we were neutral, and we did say as a country that we were going to supply both sides. Did that happen?
No.
Why not?
Well, because we were supplying secretly weapons to the British and everything, and then they started sinking our ships, the U.S. did.
We were, but the thing is, can we get through to these German ports?
No.
Why?
Russia.
Or actual world.
Blockades.
Yeah.
Because the British have the best navy in the world, because they have so many more ships than anybody else, they can actually go ahead and block ports. Again, stuff's going to get through, but not to the level that you need it to get through. And so what happens again, what kind of war is this?
Attrition.
A war of attrition. What starts to happen is as the Germans start to feel that pain of not having the supplies that they need, they're going to get more and more desperate. And they have these U-boats, Unterseeboots. These are underwater boats is what they are. We call them submarines today. And they're going to start going out and sinking merchant ships and sinking, all types of vessels. One of them is going to be the Lusitania. Right here, that's why I put it up there. And the Lusitania had Americans on that ship, and they were sunk. The ship was sunk, and like 128 Americans died. That's going to anger the United States, and this is what's going to start pushing the United States more and more to be allied with the British and the French. The war in the air. Airplanes, cool. For a lot of the men in the trenches, fun to watch. You get to see some of the big battles up there, some of the, what do you call them there? I just lost the name, dogs there, dog fights. Lost that name. They get to see the dog fights. It's entertaining to some degree. It's good for propaganda. But for the most part, airplanes do not have a huge role like they will in World War II. In World War I, they could run some bombing missions, but not very effectively and not often, and not very far. They were allowed, or they were able to do some reconnaissance, go over the different trenches and spy and get ideas of what was happening and send that kind of back. But basically, what happens here is there's really not much to the airplane. They're not as important in World War I as they will become in World War II. Okay? And a lot of these, like I said, they had dogfights. Does anybody know the most famous fighter pilot from the First World War?
Red Baron.
He was the Red Baron out of Germany, correct. So again, how did this help? It's not quite there yet. The Germans will learn and they will make airplanes a huge part of their blitzkrieg when we get to World War II. Wilson. Who was Wilson?
President of the United States.
He was President of the United States at this time. That's a picture of him right there. He ran in 1916 on a platform that said, he kept us out of the war. Do Americans want to go to war?
No.
No. Why don't they want to go to war?
They don't have troops. They don't want to have their. Oh, sorry. They don't want to have a bunch of people die of their own.
Right. They don't want to have a bunch of people die. Second of all, this is Europe's problems. Europe's always in wars. Why do we want to be involved in war? Third, well, we have a lot of Germans who live here. We've got French who live here. We've got English who live here. We got some Russians who live here. We're a hodgepodge of people. Whose side do you take? But secretly, knowing that we had more in common with the British and the fact that we were sending them so many supplies, eventually what will happen is the United States will be not as neutral as we said we were from the beginning. And what's going to be the biggest factor in getting us in? It's called the Zimmerman Note. Have you heard of that?
Yeah.
Who has not? Okay. The Zimmerman Note. What this is the following. The Germans were so desperate, and the Americans hadn't really sent anybody over to Europe yet. The Germans are so desperate that they had their foreign minister Zimmerman send a telegram to Mexico and said to the German ambassador in Mexico, go talk to the Mexican government and tell them this. If they will attack the United States, that will keep the United States busy there and out of our hair. If they will attack the United States when the war is over, we will help them possibly recover some of the lands that they lost in the 1800s, parts of Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, California, etc. This is what's sent. Well, the note is intercepted by the British. And when it's intercepted, they send it over and to the Americans. And it took him a little bit to finally do something with the note, but eventually the United States will declare war and we will join the war. And again, talking about total war here in the United States, and this is important if you have to talk about, excuse me, I need some water. I've got my water back there again. This is important because if you talk about the history of the Americas, because sometimes you're going to have to do not just the world view, but the American view, right? This is important here because what's going to happen here is we're going to start looking at ways of changing our government, our society, how we pay for war, how we go about doing things. And so, for example, here, to raise money, we're going to come up with Liberty bonds. And we're going to have all these propaganda posters. Buy Liberty bonds, because what we're asking you to do, Juliana, is buy a bond today. So this bond for $100, if you give us $100 today, we promise you in 10 years, we'll give you $150 back. We need the money now, not 5 years or 10 years from now. So they're selling bonds to start to pay for the war. They come up with the War Industries Board. This is going to be there to make sure that all the businesses are doing what they need to do, the factories are doing what they need to do to make sure the war is going and they get the war material. Food Administration, they're going to start asking you to not eat as much or to give up certain foods. Have you guys ever heard your parents say, clean your plate? Has anybody ever heard your parents say that? That expression came very popular here because if you leave food there, that food could have been used to maybe provide a meal to one of our soldiers, so by not eating your full meal, you're helping the enemy, or you shouldn't have taken as much, or you shouldn't have cooked as much. So you've got all this going on. They're going to start going ahead and making sure wages and hours, protecting rights, making sure there's no strikes. What's interesting here is conscription. World War I is going to be the beginning of this. World War II is going to be the final, nail in the coffin, if you want to say it, to change. Not only for African Americans and for women. What happens when Black Americans were drafted into the war? They went over to Europe and they fought. And when they were there, what they realized is, wait a minute here. Nobody seems to care that I'm black. People treat me like a man. I'm going to go home and I'm going to be treated like a second-class citizen? This is going to start changing the mindset of some of the African Americans and some of the black populations as they come out of this war. It's going to start, like anything, you start small and then eventually it will ramp up. And then once we get to World War II, things are going to change a lot more. But this is going to be very important. And then also, as you can see here, we have a lot of different responses. Women are now going off to work more. Businesses are doing what they can because they can make money, and that's why we're Americans. We love that so far. Questions on any of this so far? Yes, no, maybe? All right. So what are the results of World War I? Take a look over here at the casualty rate. And I cut off some of the numbers. I didn't mean to, but we're talking around 9 million right here. That's a number of 9 million. Look at Russia. Think you get to World War II when Russia loses around 28 to 30 million people. Okay? What happens here is, this is a war that the world has never seen. Yes, there had been some wars prior to, like the French and Indian War, that had been kind of a world war, had been fought all over, but never to this level here and never to the weapons that were there. Over 10 million men will actually be killed in this war. Over 10 million men will be killed in this war. So, and if you look at the death toll, that's 15% of everybody who fought is going to be killed in this war. That's just outrageous. What happens here is, out of this is going to come the lost generation. How many of you read the Great Gatsby? You're reading it now, right? It's the 20s, right? Do they talk about the lost generation? Have you talked about that? The lost generation, the roaring 20s, the lost generation. It's an absolute, it's there for one reason. It's a reaction to what they just saw. We're going to talk about that on Thursday when I do that one. But this is a lost generation. Not only are so many men dead or wounded so badly that they can never really, live a normal life, but people's morals, how they thought about the world, how they thought about religion, how they thought about everything, is going to change dramatically. Civilian death toll, there are a lot of civilians who are also killed. One of the things that's going to really hurt the planet at this point is called the Spanish flu. The Spanish flu will have a huge epidemic in 1918 and 1919. During that, something like 35, 40 million people will die from the flu. It is astronomical. Why was it so bad? Well, think about it. All of these men were fighting a war in the same area. They got infected. Then they went home. What did they do with those infections? They spread it. People don't quite have the same nourishment that they were having before. They don't have the nutrients. They don't have the food, the water, the whatever. This is going to be disastrous. This is also going to lead to that roaring 20s kind of mentality. Economically, Britain will have spent 34 billion pounds, which if you use today's money is roughly 3.7 trillion pounds. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money in this war. Okay, the U.S. is going to lend all of this money. Basically, what's going to happen here, again, if you look at it, especially on the continent, not so much in England or in Britain, but on the continent, France is going to be destroyed. Germany's going to be destroyed. Austria is going to be destroyed. Russia's areas are destroyed. Industries are down. Fields aren't fertile. I mean, the agriculture, everything, it's a disaster, and now they're going to have to go ahead and they're going to have to rebuild in the 1920s. So economically, this is going to have a huge impact. Where did I hear? Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. This one was a little bit different. I thought it confused me for a second. Sorry on the camera, it confused me for a second. If we look at politics and what happens, if you take a look, when it comes to England and France, the British and the French, there's really no major changes. They're going to have a similar government, similar size and territory, nothing really happens. When you come to Central Europe, and I'll show you this, the whole map is going to be redone. There are going to be countries that have never been heard of before that are going to become countries. Germany, they have a revolution, they throw out the Kaiser, a new government comes in, and that's going to be liked by some and hated by the Nazis, called the Weimar Republic. It's going to be a social democracy, and that's going to lead to a lot of chaos within Germany. Russia, they're out of the war. They no longer have a czar. They're now a communist nation, and they will be eventually the Soviet Union. Austria, Hungary, they're completely gone. They become very small countries. Their power, their prestige, everything is gone. The Ottoman Empire is gone. Now we have basically a Middle East that we don't know what to do with. It's kind of there, but what do we do with it? The British will take over a lot of this, and they will start to bring in resettled Jewish folks into what we call today Palestine, which is now, a lot of it is modern-day Israel. That's going to cause problems politically. The United States is going to come out of this war as the leading economic power. It used to be London, it used to be England, now it's going to be Wall Street, New York, America. That's huge. Japan and China, they were on the outskirts of what was happening, but they've seen Europe get very weak. They just lost all these men. They've just gone through 4 years of awful hell in war. And now Japan is saying, we can now start to look to take over some of those territories over here while the British and the French are kind of licking their wounds and trying to get themselves back together. China is going to be there saying, hey, we're really worried about what the Japanese are doing, because the Chinese aren't quite there. They're not like they are today, a very powerful nation. They were kind of there politically, economically, militarily, compared to the Japanese, not quite as strong. Okay? Sorry. What happened? I thought I had a map. I guess I thought I had a map for you guys, and I apologize. But I was going to show you the new countries that came out of it, and I do apologize. So those are kind of the strategies, the fronts, and the results of the war. When I see you all on Thursday, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the Treaty of Versailles. We're going to go ahead and talk about the 20s and 30s, all the social changes that come about, specifically, like, you know, especially for women and so forth, and how they change a lot. And then we're going to move into some of the world leaders and get us into World War II, okay? We're going to talk about collective security. Hopefully this is helpful, yes, no? My suggestion to you to do is, if you come in, honestly, it's up to you, but I'm going to take every PowerPoint and make it into an actual PDF too, so that might be easier for you to print out and so forth. So, all right. Like I said, I'm just following the orders of Mrs. I, because she said these would be the things to hit to get you the biggest bang for your buck. So, I'm done.